Chapter 9, The Great Meeting on Stable Hill. For a long time they could not speak, nor even shed a tear. Then the unicorn stamped the ground with his hoof and shook his mane and spoke. "Sire," he said, "there is now no need of counsel. We see that the ape's plans were laid deeper than we dreamed of. Doubtless, he has been long in secret traffic with the Tisroc, and as soon as he had found the lion skin, he sent him word to make ready his navy for the taking of Cair Paravel and all Narnia. Nothing now remains for us seven but to go back to Stable Hill, proclaim the truth, and take the adventure that Aslan sends us. And if by a great marvel we defeat those 30 Calormenes who are with the ape, then to turn again and die in battle with the far greater host of them that will soon march from Cair Paravel." Tirion nodded, but he turned to the children and said, "Now, friends, it is time for you to go home, hence into your own world. Doubtless you have done all that you were sent to do." But we've done nothing," said Jill, who was shivering, not with fear exactly, but because everything was so horrible. "Nay," said the king, "you loosed me from the tree. You glided before me like a snake last night in the wood and took Puzzle. And you, Eustace, killed your man. But you are too young to share in such a bloody end as we others must meet tonight, or it may be 3 days hence. I entreat you, nay, I command you, to return to your own place. I should be put to shame if I let such young warriors fall in battle on my side." "No, no," said Jill, very white when she began speaking, and then suddenly very red, and then white again. "We won't. I don't care what you say. We're going to stick to you whatever happens, aren't we, Eustace?" "Yes, but there's no need to get so worked up about it," said Eustace, who had stuck his hands in his pockets, forgetting how very odd that looks when you're wearing a male shirt. "Because, you see, we haven't got any choice. What's the good of talking about our going back? How? We've got no magic for doing it." This was very good sense, but at the moment, Jill hated Eustace for saying it. He was fond of being dreadfully matter-of-fact when other people got excited. When Tirion realized that the two strangers could not get home, unless Aslan suddenly whisked them away, he next wanted them to go across the southern mountains into Archenland, where they might possibly be safe. But they didn't know their way, and there was no one to send with them. Also, as Poggin said, once the Calormenes had Narnia, they would certainly take Archenland in the next week or so. The Tisroc had always wanted to have these northern countries for his own. In the end, Eustace and Jill begged so hard that Tirion said they could come with him and take their chance, or as he much more sensibly called it, the adventure that Aslan would send them. The king's first idea was that they should not go back to Stable Hill. They were sick of the very name of it by now, till after dark. But the dwarf told them that if they arrived there by daylight, they would probably find the place deserted, except perhaps for a Calormene sentry. The beasts were far too frightened by what the ape and Ginger had told them about this new angry Aslan, or Tashlan, to go near it except when they were called together for these horrible midnight meetings. And Calormenes are never good woodsmen. Poggin thought that even by daylight they could easily get round to somewhere behind the stable without being seen. This would be much harder to do when the night had come, and the ape might be calling the beasts together, and all the Calormenes were on duty. And when the meeting did begin, they could leave Puzzle at the back of the stable, completely out of sight, till the moment at which they wanted to produce him. This was obviously a good thing, for their only chance was to give the Narnians a sudden surprise. Everyone agreed, and the whole party set off on a new line, northwest towards the hated hill. The eagle sometimes flew to and fro above them. Sometimes he sat perched on Puzzle's back. No one, not even the king himself, except in some great need, would dream of riding on a unicorn. This time, Jill and Eustace walked together. They had been feeling very brave when they were begging to be allowed to come with the others, but now they didn't feel brave at all. Paul, said Eustace in a whisper, I may as well tell you I've got the wind up. Oh, you're all right, Scrub, said Jill. You can fight, but I'm just shaking, if you want to know the truth. Oh, shaking's nothing, said Eustace. I'm feeling I'm going to be sick. Don't talk about that, for goodness sake, said Jill. They went on in silence for a minute or two. Paul, said Eustace presently. What? Said she. What will happen if we get killed here? Well, we'll be dead, I suppose. But I mean, what will happen in our own world? Shall we wake up and find ourselves back in that train? Or shall we just vanish and never be heard of any more? Or shall we be dead in England? Gosh, I never thought of that. It'll be rum for Peter and the others if they saw me waving out of the window, and then when the train comes in, we're nowhere to be found. Or if they found if we're dead over there in England. Said Jill, what a horrid idea. It wouldn't be horrid for us, said Eustace. We shouldn't be there. I almost wish... No, I don't, though, said Jill. What were you going to say? I was going to say, I wish we'd never come. But I don't. Even if we are killed, I'd rather be killed fighting for Narnia than grow old and stupid at home and perhaps go about in a bath chair and then die in the end just the same. Or be smashed up by British railways. Why do you say that? Well, when that awful jerk came, the one that seemed to throw us into Narnia, I thought it was the beginning of a railway accident. So I was jolly glad to find ourselves here instead. While Jill and Eustace were talking about this, the others were discussing their plans and becoming less miserable. That was because they were now thinking of what was to be done this very night, and the thought of what had happened to Narnia. The thought that all her glories and joys were over was pushed away into the back part of their minds. The moment they stopped talking, it would come out and make them wretched again. But they kept on talking. Poggin was really quite cheerful about the night's work they had to do. He was sure that the boar and the bear, and probably all the dogs, would come over to their side at once, and he couldn't believe that all the other dwarfs would stick to Griffle, and fighting by firelight and in and out among trees would be an advantage to the weaker side. And then, if they could win tonight, need they really throw their lives away by meeting the main Calormene army a few days later? Why not hide in the woods, or even up in the western waste beyond the great waterfall and live like outlaws? And then they might gradually get stronger and stronger, for talking beasts and Archenlanders would be joining them every day. And at last they'd come out of hiding and sweep the Calormenes, who would have got careless by then, out of the country, and Narnia would be revived. After all, something very like that had happened in the time of King Miraz. And Tyrion heard all this and thought, but what about Tash? And felt in his bones that none of it was going to happen, but he didn't say so. When they got near to Stable Hill, of course, everyone became quiet. Then the real woodworking began. From the moment at which they first saw the hill to the moment at which they all arrived at the back of the stable, it took them over 2 hours. It's the sort of thing one couldn't describe properly unless one wrote pages and pages about it. The journey from each bit of cover to the next was a separate adventure, and there were very long waits in between, and several false alarms. If you are a good scout or a good guide, you will know already what it must have been like. But about sunset, they were all safe in a clump of holly trees about 15 yards behind the stable. They all munched some biscuit and lay down. Then came the worst part, the waiting. Luckily for the children, they slept for a couple of hours, but of course they woke up when the night grew cold, and what's worse, woke up very thirsty, with no chance of getting a drink. Puzzle just stood, shivering a little with nervousness, and said nothing. But Tyrion, with his head against Jewel's flank, slept as soundly as if he were in his royal bed at Cair Paravel, till the sound of a gong beating awoke him, and he sat up and saw that there was firelight on the far side of the stable, and knew that the hour had come. "Kiss me, Jewel," he said, "for certainly this is our last night on earth, and if ever I offended against you in any matter, great or small, forgive me now." "Dear king," said the unicorn, "I could almost wish you had, so that I might forgive it. Farewell. We have known great joys together. If Aslan gave me my choice, I would choose no other life than the life I have had, and no other death than the one we go to." Then they woke up Farsight, who was asleep with his head under his wing. It made him look as if he had no head at all, and crept forward to the stable. They left Puzzle, not without a kind word, for no one was angry with him now, just behind it, telling him not to move till someone came to fetch him, and took up their position at one end of the stable. The bonfire had not been lit for long and was just beginning to blaze up. It was only a few feet away from them, and the great crowd of Narnian creatures were on the other side of it, so that Tyrion could not at first see them very well, though of course he saw dozens of eyes shining with reflections of the fire, as you've seen a rabbit's or cat's eyes in the headlights of a car. And just as Tyrion took his place, the gong stopped beating, and from somewhere on his left, 3 figures appeared. One was Rishta Tarkin, the Calormene captain. The second was the ape. He was holding onto the Tarkin's hand with one paw and kept whimpering and muttering, "Not so fast, don't go so fast. I'm not all well. Oh, my poor head. These midnight meetings are getting too much for me. Apes aren't meant to be up at night. It's not as if I was a rat or a bat. Oh, my poor head." On the other side of the ape, walking very softly and stately, with his tail straight up in the air, came Ginger the cat. They were heading for the bonfire and were so close to Tyrion that they would have seen him at once if they had looked in the right direction. Fortunately, they did not, but Tyrion heard Rishta say to Ginger in a low voice, "Now, cat, to thy post. See thou play the part well." "Meow, meow, count on me," said Ginger. Then he stepped away beyond the bonfire and sat down in the front row of the assembled beasts, in the audience, as you might say. For really, as it happened, the whole thing was rather like a theater. The crowd of Narnians were like the people in the seats. The little grassy place just in front of the stable, where the bonfire burned and the ape and the captain stood to talk to the crowd, was like the stage. The stable itself was like the scenery at the back of the stage, and Tyrion and his friends were like people peering round from behind the scenery. It was a splendid position. If any of them stepped forward into the full firelight, all eyes would be fixed on him at once. On the other hand, so long as they stood still in the shadow of the end wall of the stable, it was 100 to 1 against their being noticed. Rishta Tarkin dragged the ape up close to the fire. The pair of them turned to face the crowd, and this of course meant that their backs were towards Tyrion and his friends. "Now, monkey," said Rishta Tarkin in a low voice, "say the words that wiser heads have put into thy mouth, and hold up thy head." As he spoke, he gave the ape a little prod or kick from behind with the point of his toe. Do leave me alone, muttered Shift, but he sat up straighter and began in a louder voice. Now listen, all of you. A terrible thing has happened, a wicked thing, the wickedest thing that ever was done in Narnia. And Aslan, Tashlan, fool, whispered Rishta Tarkin. Tashlan, I mean, of course, said the ape, is very angry about it. There was a terrible silence while the beasts waited to hear what new trouble was in store for them. The little party by the end wall of the stable also held their breath. What on earth was coming now? Yes, said the ape, at this very moment, when the terrible one himself is among us, there in the stable just behind me, one wicked beast has chosen to do what you'd think no one would dare to do, even if he were 1,000 miles away. It has dressed itself up in a lion skin and is wandering about in these very woods, pretending to be Aslan. Jill wondered for a moment if the ape had gone mad. Was he going to tell the whole truth? A roar of horror and rage went up from the beasts. Arrgh, came the growls. Who is he? Where is he? Just let me get my teeth into him. It was seen last night, screamed the ape, but it's got away. It's a donkey, a common, miserable ass. If any of you see that ass, grrr, growled the beast. We will. He'd better keep out of our way. Jill looked at the king. His mouth was open and his face was full of horror. And then she understood the devilish cunning of the enemy's plan. By mixing a little truth with it, they had made their lie far stronger. What was the good now of telling the beasts that an ass had dressed up as a lion to deceive them? The ape would only say, "That's just what I've said." What was the good of showing them Puzzle in his lion skin? They would only tear him to pieces. That's taken the wind out of our sails, whispered Eustace. The ground is taken from under our feet, said Tyrion. Cursed cleverness, said Poggin. I'll be sworn that this new lie is of Ginger's making. Chapter 10. Who will go into the stable? Jill felt something tickling her ear. It was Jewel the unicorn, whispering to her with the wide whisper of a horse's mouth. As soon as she heard what he was saying, she nodded and tiptoed back to where Puzzle was standing. Quickly and quietly, she cut the last cords that bound the lion skin to him. It wouldn't do for him to be caught with that on, after what the ape had said. She would like to have hidden the skin somewhere very far away, but it was too heavy. The best she could do was to kick it in among the thickest bushes. Then she made signs to Puzzle to follow her, and they both joined the others. The ape was speaking again. And after a horrid thing like that, Aslan, Tashlan, is angrier than ever. He says he's been a great deal too good to you, coming out every night to be looked at, see? Well, he's not coming out any more. Howls and mewings and squeals and grunts were the animal's answers to this. But suddenly a quite different voice broke in with a loud laugh. Ha, 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 ha. Hark what the monkey says, it shouted. We know why he isn't going to bring his precious Aslan out. I'll tell you why. Because he hasn't got him. He never had anything except an old donkey with a lion skin on its back. Now he's lost that, and he doesn't know what to do. Tyrion could not see the faces on the other side of the fire very well, but he guessed this was Griffle, the chief dwarf, and he was quite certain of it when a second later all the dwarfs' voices joined in singing, "Don't know what to do, don't know what to do, don't know what to do." "Silence!" thundered Rishta Tarkin. "Silence, children of mud! Listen to me, you other Nornians, lest I give command to my warriors to fall upon you with the edge of the sword. The Lord Shift has already told you of that wicked ass. Do you think, because of him, that there is no real Tashlan in the stable? Do you? Beware, beware!" "No, no," shouted most of the crowd. But the dwarfs said, "That's right, Dorky, you've got it. Come on, monkey, show us what's in the stable. Seeing is believing." When next there was a moment's quiet, the ape said, "You dwarfs think you're very clever, don't you? But not so fast. I never said you couldn't see Tashlan. Anyone who likes can see him." The whole assembly became silent. Then, after nearly a minute, the bear began in a slow, puzzled voice. "I don't quite understand all this," it grumbled. "I thought you said—" "You thought," repeated the ape, "as if anyone could call what goes on in your head thinking. Listen, you others, anyone can see Tashlan, but he's not coming out. You have to go in and see him." "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you," said dozens of voices. "That's what we wanted. We could go in and see him face to face, and he'll be kind, and it will all be as it used to be." And the birds chattered, and the dogs barked excitedly. Then suddenly there was a great stirring, and a noise of creatures rising to their feet. And in a second, the whole lot of them would have been rushing forward and trying to crowd into the stable door all together. But the ape shouted, "Get back! Quiet! Not so fast!" The beasts stopped, many of them with one paw in the air, many with tails wagging, and all of them with heads on one side. "I thought you said—" began the bear, but Shift interrupted. "Anyone can go in," he said, "but one at a time. Who will go first?" He didn't say he was feeling very kind. He's been licking his lips a lot since he swallowed up the wicked king the other night. He's been growling a good deal this morning. I wouldn't much like to go into that stable myself tonight, but just as you please. Who'd like to go in first? Don't blame me if he swallows you whole or blasts you into a cinder with the mere terror of his eyes. That's your affair. Now then, who's first? What about one of you, you dwarfs?" "Dilly dilly, come and be killed," sneered Griffle. "How do we know what you've got in there?" "Ho, ho!" cried the ape. "So you're beginning to think there's something there, eh? Well, all you beasts were making noise enough a minute ago. What struck you all dumb? Who's going in first?" But the beasts all stood looking at one another and began backing away from the stable. Very few tails were wagging now. The ape waddled to and fro, jeering at them. "Ho, ho, ho!" he chuckled. "I thought you were all so eager to see Tashlan face to face. Change your mind, eh?" Tyrion bent his head to hear something that Jill was trying to whisper in his ear. "What do you think is really inside the stable?" she said. "Who knows?" said Tyrion. "Two Calormenes with drawn swords, as likely as not, one on each side of the door." "You don't think," said Jill, "it might be, that horrid thing we saw?" "Tash himself?" whispered Tyrion. "There's no knowing. But courage, child. We are all between the paws of the true Aslan." Then a most surprising thing happened. Ginger the cat said in a cool, clear voice, not at all as if he was excited. I'll go in, if you like. Every creature turned and fixed its eyes on the cat. Mark their subtleties, sire, said Poggin to the king. This cursed cat is in on the plot, in the very centre of it. Whatever is in the stable will not hurt him, I'll be bound. Then Ginger will come out again and say that he has seen some wonder. But Tyrion had no time to answer him. The ape was calling the cat to come forward. Ho, ho, said the ape. So you, a pert puss, would look upon him face to face. Come on, then. I'll open the door for you. Don't blame me if he scares the whiskers off your face. That's your affair. And the cat got up and came out of its place in the crowd, walking primly and daintily, with its tail in the air, not one hair on its sleek coat out of place. It came on till it had passed the fire and was so close to that Tyrion, from where he stood with his shoulder against the end wall of the stable, could look right into its face. Its big green eyes never blinked. Who has a cucumber? Muttered Eustace. It knows it has nothing to fear. The ape, chuckling and making faces, shuffled across beside the cat, put up his paw, drew the bolt, and opened the door. Tyrion thought he could hear the cat purring as it walked into the dark doorway. The most horrible caterwaul you ever heard made everyone jump. You have been wakened yourself by cats quarreling or making love on the roof in the middle of the night. You know the sound. This was worse. The ape was knocked head over heels by Ginger coming back out of the stable at top speed. If you had not known he was a cat, you might have thought he was a ginger-colored streak of lightning. He shot across the open grass, back into the crowd. No one wants to meet a cat in that state. You could see animals getting out of his way to left and right. He dashed up a tree, whisked around, and hung head downwards. His tail was bristled out till it was nearly as thick as his whole body. His eyes were like saucers of green fire. Along his back, every single hair stood on end. Oh, I'd give my beard, whispered Poggin, to know whether that brute is only acting, or whether it has really found something in there that frightened it. Peace, friend, said Tyrion, for the captain and the ape were also whispering, and he wanted to hear what they said. He did not succeed, except that he heard the ape once more whimpering, my head, my head. But he got the idea that those two were almost as puzzled by the cat's behavior as himself. Now, Ginger, said the captain, enough of that noise. Tell them what thou hast seen. Hi, ow, screamed the cat. Art thou not called a talking beast? Said the captain. Then hold thy devilish noise and talk. What followed was rather horrible. Tyrion felt quite certain, and so did the others, that the cat was trying to say something, but nothing came out of its mouth except the ordinary, ugly cat noises you might hear from any angry or frightened old Tom in a backyard in England. And the longer he caterwauled, the less like a talking beast he looked. Uneasy whimperings and little sharp squeals broke out from among the other animals. Look, look, said the voice of the bear. It can't talk. It has forgotten how to talk. It has gone back to being a dumb beast. Look at its face. Everyone saw that it was true. And then the greatest terror of all fell upon those Narnians, for every one of them had been taught, when it was only a chick or a puppy or a cub, how Aslan at the beginning of the world had turned the beasts of Narnia into talking beasts, and warned them that if they weren't good, they might one day be turned back again and be like the poor, witless animals one meets in other countries.
And now it is coming upon us, they moaned.
Mercy, mercy, wailed the beasts. Spare us, Lord Shift. Stand between us and Aslan. You must always go in and speak to him for us. We daren't. We daren't. Ginger disappeared further up into the tree. No one ever saw him again. Tyrion stood with his hand on his sword hilt and his head bowed. He was dazed with the horrors of that night. Sometimes he thought it would be best to draw his sword at once and rush upon the Calormenes. Then the next moment he thought it would be better to wait and see what new turn affairs might take. And now a new turn came.
My father,
came a clear, ringing voice from the left of the crowd. Tyrion knew at once it was one of the Calormenes speaking, for in the Tisroc's army, the common soldiers call the officers my master, but the officers call their senior officers my father. Jill and Eustace didn't know this, but after looking this way and that, they saw the speaker. For of course, people at the sides of the crowd were easier to see than people in the middle, where the glares of the fire made all beyond it look rather black. He was young and tall and slender, and even rather beautiful in the dark, haughty Calormene way.
my father,
He said to the captain,
I also desire to go in. Peace, Emeth,
said the captain.
Who called thee to council? Does it become a boy to speak?
My father, said Emeth.
Truly, I am younger than thou, yet I also am of the blood of the Tarkins, even as thou art. And I also am the servant of Tash. Therefore, silence,
said Rishta Tarkin.
Am not I thy captain? Thou hast nothing to do with this stable. It is for the Narnians.
Nay, my father, answered Emeth.
Thou hast said that the Razlan and our Tash are all one. And if that is the truth, then Tash himself is in yonder. And how then sayest thou that I have nothing to do with him? For gladly would I die 1,000 deaths if I might look once on the face of Tash. Thou art a fool and understandest nothing, said Rishta Tarkin. These be high matters.
Emeth's face grew sterner.
Is it then not true that Tash and Aslan are all one?
He asked.
Has the ape lied to us? Of course they're all one,
said the ape.
Swear it, ape,
said Emeth.
Oh dear,
whimpered Shift.
I wish you'd all stop bothering me. My head does ache. Yes, yes, I swear it. Then, my father,
said Emeth,
I am utterly determined to go in.
Fool, began Rishta Tarkin, but at once the dwarfs began shouting,
Come along, darky, why don't you let him in? Why do you let the Narnians in and keep your own people out? What have you got in there that you don't want your own men to meet?
Tyrion and his friends could only see the back of Rishta Tarkin, so they never knew what his face looked like as he shrugged his shoulders and said,
Bear witness all that I am guiltless of this young fool's blood. Get thee in, rash boy, and make haste.
Then, just as Ginger had done, Emeth came walking forward into the open strip of grass between the bonfire and the stable. His eyes were shining, his face very solemn. His hand was on his sword hilt, and he carried his head high. Jill felt like crying when she looked at his face, and Jewel whispered in the king's ear, By the lion's mane, I almost love this young warrior. Calormene though he be, he is worthy of a better god than Tash. I do wish we knew what is really inside there, said Eustace. Emeth opened the door and went into the black mouth of the stable. He closed the door behind him. Only a few moments passed, but it seemed longer before the door opened again. A figure in Calormene armor reeled out, fell on its back, and lay still. The door closed behind it. The captain leapt towards it and bent down to stare at its face. He gave a start of surprise. Then he recovered himself and turned to the crowd, crying out,
"The rash boy has had his will. He has looked on Tash and is dead. Take warning, all of you."
we will, said the poor beasts. But Tyrion and his friends stared first at the dead Calormene and then at one another, for they, being so close, could see what the crowd, being further off and beyond the fire, could not see. This dead man was not Emeth. He was quite different, an older man, thicker and not so tall, with a big beard.
"Ho, ho, ho," chuckled the ape. "Any more? Anyone else wants to go in? Well, as you're all shy, I'll choose the next. You boar. On you come. Drive him up, Calormene. He shall see Tashlin face to face."
"Umph," grunted the boar, rising heavily to his feet.
"Come on then. Try my tusks."
When Tyrion saw that brave beast getting ready to fight for its life, and Calormene's soldiers beginning to close in on it with their drawn scimitars, and no one going to his help, something seemed to burst inside him. He no longer cared if this was the best moment to interfere or not. "Swords out," he whispered to the others. "Arrow on string. Follow." Next moment, the astonished Narnian saw 7 figures leap forth in front of the stable, 4 of them in shining mail. The king's sword flashed in the firelight as he waved it above his head and cried in a great voice, "Here I stand, Tyrion of Narnia, in Aslan's name, to prove with my body that Tash is a foul fiend, the ape a manifold traitor, and these Calormenes worthy of death. To my side, all true Narnians. Would you wait till your new masters have killed you all, one by one?